Welcome to the law offices of Chris M. Ingram's Immigration News Show. Today we ask, can you get a green card without an employer? We would like to thank attorney Chris M. Ingram and staff of the law offices of Chris M. Ingram for their hard work in preparing the research for this show, which draws on a wide variety of news sources from both sides of the aisle, providing a balanced view. Attorney Ingram is also a vocal advocate for the rights and protection of immigration applicants, although our coverage is designed to be nonpartisan. Please don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to our channel. We are also on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, or Reddit, and Instagram, where we're growing rapidly thanks to our social media team. You can also visit our website on www.breakthroughUSA.com. We'd love to see you there. Disclaimer. Please note that this presentation should not be intended as legal advice for your specific situation. If you, a friend, or a family member would like a free consultation, you can visit our website at www.breakthroughUSA.com and schedule an appointment. We'd love to hear from you and help you if we can. We'd also like to point out that this presentation was created using AI hosts. Okay, let's dive in.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So today we are dealing with what is basically a massive systemic illusion.
Oh, absolutely. It's an illusion that traps a lot of brilliant people.
Right. It's this idea that if you are a highly skilled professional, like a machine learning engineer or a cardiovascular surgeon, maybe an aerospace researcher, that your talent alone is just this like master key that simply unlocks the United States border.
Right, because people look at the sheer volume of foreign-born talent driving the U.S. economy and they assume, there must be a frictionless conveyor belt bringing them all here.
Exactly. But the reality, which our legal team has laid out in like really granular detail for this discussion, is that technical brilliance is only half the equation.
Yeah, barely half, honestly.
Right. The other half is this rigid, highly bureaucratic legal framework that does not automatically recognize your worth. I mean, you could be the most innovative startup founder in the world, but if your OPT expires and you haven't structured a long-term immigration strategy, your brilliant code won't prevent you from having to pack your bags.
No, it won't. And it's a critical blind spot for so many professionals. They treat their career trajectory and their immigration status as two completely independent variables.
Like they're on separate tracks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You focus on securing the Series A funding or maybe publishing in a Tier 1 journal or completing this really rigorous medical fellowship.
Right.
And you're operating under this assumption that the legal right to remain in the country will just, naturally resolve itself because your work is objectively valuable.
But the U.S. immigration system doesn't care about objective value, does it?
Not at all. It does not operate on objective, self-evident value. It operates on documented, legally categorized evidence.
Evidence, yeah.
Right. So if you are not simultaneously architecting your legal footprint while you build your professional footprint, you are essentially building a skyscraper on land you do not have the deed to.
Oh, wow. That's a great way to put it. Building on land you don't own.
Yeah. And the entire premise of our deep dive today is that career planning and immigration planning are deeply, inextricably connected. For you, the listener, you cannot effectively navigate the transition from a student visa into a specialty occupation and eventually toward permanent residency without a deliberate strategy.
A strategy that has to begin years before you actually need to file a petition. Right?
Years before. Exactly.
Okay, so let's ground this in a reality that everyone following the tech sector understands implicitly. We constantly hear about the massive success stories, the outliers who reshape entire industries.
The big names.
Right. And Jensen Huang is like the archetype here.
Right.
Our researchers pulled his trajectory into focus for us.
Oh, yeah. The CEO and co-founder of Nvidia.
Exactly. Born in Taiwan, immigrated as a child, went through Oregon State and Stanford, and ended up having the foundational conversation for Nvidia at a Denny's in San Jose back in 1993.
At a Denny's, which is just such a great detail.
It is. It's a compelling narrative, especially knowing he worked service jobs early on. But, okay, let's unpack this. I want to push back on the utility of this specific example for our listener.
Okay, lay it on me.
The vast majority of immigrant engineers are not going to command a multi-trillion-dollar market cap.
Sure.
Right. Like they are not going to single-handedly dictate the global supply chain for AI infrastructure.
Probably not, no.
So if I am an H-1B software developer trying to figure out how to avoid the decades-long green card backlog, why am I looking at a guy who's been running a tech empire for 30 years It just feels completely disconnected from the daily grind of immigration anxiety.
Well, it feels disconnected if you only look at the end result, right? If you're just staring at the multi-trillion-dollar valuation.
Yeah, which is hard not to do.
But what's fascinating here is that if you look at the mechanics of how Nvidia grew, it perfectly mirrors the strategy required for a successful immigration petition. Our legal team didn't highlight Huang to suggest that extreme wealth is the benchmark for value.
Okay, then why highlight him?
They highlighted him to demonstrate the compounding nature of technical depth. Think about it. In 1993, at that Denny's, they were not designing artificial intelligence.
No, they were making video game graphics.
Exactly. They were trying to figure out how to render polygons faster for video games. It was a highly specific, arguably very niche technical problem.
Right.
But by relentlessly deepening their expertise in parallel processing, which is, the fundamental architecture of a GPU, they inadvertently built the exact hardware required for the AI revolution decades later.
Ah, I see. So the parallel here for the foreign national listening is that you do not need to arrive in the United States with some world-changing invention.
Exactly. You need to start in a specific niche, solve complex problems, and allow your expertise to compound over time. The U.S. immigration system, particularly in those employment-based categories, rewards individuals who demonstrate a sustained record of progress.
Progress and like an expanding sphere of influence in their field.
Right. It's not about walking into the USCIS office with a fully formed tech empire.
It's about proving that you have the capacity to build a foundation that could support one. You're trying to demonstrate predictive value.
Predictive value, yes, that is the exact phrase.
Like, if you solve this complex problem in 3D graphics rendering in 1995, there is a really high probability you will be capable of solving a complex problem in neural network training in 2015.
Precisely. You are establishing a trajectory of innovation. You have to prove that your presence in the U.S. yields a compounding return on investment for the country's technological or economic infrastructure.
Attorney Chris Ingram provided a perspective in the legal research that I think nails this exact dynamic.
Oh, yeah. What did Chris say?
I have it right here. Chris notes, quote, Jensen Huang's story reminds us that immigration is not only about where someone comes from, it is about what they are able to build when they are given the chance to grow. For STEM immigrants, the lesson is to take your work seriously, document your achievements carefully, and understand that your contribution may become much bigger than you can see today, end quote.
It's that Word document. That's the linchpin.
Yeah, and that word is where I think the real friction lies. Because, engineers are trained to build, to optimize, to debug. They're generally not trained to act as their own PR firm or legal archivist.
And that is the fatal flaw in so many immigration cases. The engineer solves the problem, pushes the code, and just moves on to the next sprint.
On to the next ticket.
Right. But in the eyes of the adjudicator reviewing your petition 5 years later, if the impact of that code is not meticulously documented, it effectively never happened.
Wow. If it's not documented, it never happened.
Exactly. The adjudicator cannot log into your company's server to see your brilliant architecture. They only see the paper trail.
So you really have to cultivate a habit of, forensic documentation.
Forensic documentation. When you lead a project that improves system efficiency by 15%, you do not just celebrate the technical win, you must immediately secure the evidence that translates that 15% into business value.
Did it save the company $3 million in server costs?
Exactly. Did it allow your firm to secure a major government contract? Did it prevent a critical security breach? You need the internal memos, the project closure reports, the emails from stakeholders explicitly acknowledging the downstream impact of your specific contribution.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
Right.
You are essentially telling the listener that their daily work output has two entirely separate audiences.
Two very different audiences, yeah.
The first audience is their manager, who cares about the technical execution and the immediate business objective.
Right.
But the second, arguably much more important audience, is a government official sitting in a service center years in the future who needs to understand the socioeconomic impact of that work.
Yes.
You have to build a brag folder that speaks both languages.
It must speak the language of national or economic interest. If you are called upon to peer review a colleague's research, save the invitation, save your review, save the correspondence.
Save everything.
Everything. If you file a patent, document the commercialization efforts around that patent. The legal standard for categories like the O1 visa or the EB-2 national interest waiver requires you to prove that you have risen to a small percentage at the top of your field or that your work has substantial merit.
And you cannot reconstruct that evidence retroactively when you suddenly realize your current visa is expiring in 2 months.
No, you'll panic. It must be a continuous disciplined part of your professional life from day one.
Okay, so this logic of compounding value and undeniable documentation, it doesn't just apply to writing code or designing semiconductors. It applies with equal, if not greater intensity to the people maintaining our physical infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And by that, I mean human health. Our legal team shifted the focus of their research from the architecture of technology to the architecture of medicine. And the numbers here are, frankly, alarming.
Alarming is the right word.
Yet, we aren't just talking about economic competitiveness anymore. We're talking about basic survival and system viability. The Association of American Medical Colleges projects a shortage of up to 86,000 physicians by 2036.
86,000. It is a demographic inevitability.
Because the population is aging, right?
The U.S. population is expanding, yes, but more importantly, it is aging rapidly. The demand for complex, chronic care is accelerating at a pace that the domestic medical education pipeline simply cannot match.
It takes so long to train a doctor.
It takes a minimum of a decade to train a specialist. You cannot simply flip a switch and create 86,000 new doctors overnight. The system relies entirely on a critical influx of external talent to prevent a total collapse.
And the research provided by our team quantifies that reliance. Listen to this. International medical graduates, physicians who completed their medical schooling outside of the U.S. or Canada, currently make up nearly 1/4 of the entire active physician workforce in the United States.
1 in 4.
1 in 4 doctors. That means if you walk into an emergency room, a rural clinic, or a specialized research hospital, there's a 25% chance the person saving your life or managing your care navigated the immigration system to be there.
Right. And you'd think we'd make that easy for them.
Exactly. But the legal framework they have to navigate to provide that care seems almost punitive. Let's break down the J-1 visa and the Conrad 30 waiver, because this is where the policy mechanics actively clash with the healthcare reality.
Okay, so to understand the friction here, you have to look at the structure of the J-1 exchange visitor visa. This is the primary vehicle for foreign medical graduates to complete their medical residencies in the United States.
Okay.
Now, the philosophical underpinning of the J-1 program is educational exchange. The idea is that you come to the U.S., you receive world-class training, and then you take that knowledge back to your home country to benefit your native population.
That sounds nice in theory.
In theory, sure. But because of that underlying philosophy, the J-1 carries a very heavy restriction, the 2-year home country physical presence requirement.
Wait, meaning what?
Meaning, once the physician completes their U.S. residency, they are legally mandated to leave the United States and reside in their home country for 2 full years before they are even eligible to apply for an H-1B working visa or permanent residency.
Which creates an immediate paradox.
Massive one.
So, if the U.S. desperately needs doctors, we just established a shortage of 86,000.
Yeah.
And these foreign-trained doctors want to work here. Why is the system designed to kick them out? We bring brilliant minds here. We put them through grueling residencies. They learn the intricacies of the U.S. healthcare system. They integrate into local medical teams.
Yeah.
And the moment they are fully trained, independent attending physicians, the government mandates their deportation for 2 years. It's an active brain drain of the exact resource we desperately need.
It is entirely counterproductive to the immediate needs of the U.S. healthcare system, particularly in marginalized areas.
That's so.
Well, domestic medical graduates disproportionately gravitate toward affluent urban centers where compensation is higher and, the lifestyle is more desirable.
Sure, makes sense.
But this leaves vast swaths of the country, rural counties, inner-city clinics, Native American reservations, critically underserved. The government recognized this market failure, which is why the Conrad 30 waiver program was instituted.
Okay, the Conrad 30, what does that do?
It is a targeted override of that 2-year return requirement. USCIS will waive the requirement for a J-1 physician if they sign a contract to practice medicine full-time for at least 3 years in a federally designated health professional shortage area or a medically underserved area.
Okay, that sounds like a pragmatic compromise on the surface.
On the surface, yeah.
Right. The U.S. gets to retain the medical talent it just trained, and the most vulnerable populations get access to health care they would otherwise be denied. The physician gets to stay and transition to an H-1B, and the rural hospital gets a fully credentialed doctor.
Win-win, right.
But the devil is in the details, specifically in that number, 30. Our legal team's research highlights that every single state Department of Health is capped at issuing only 30 of these waivers per year.
Just 30.
And this is where I struggle to understand the logic. Why a flat 30? Why does California, with a population of nearly 40 million people and massive underserved urban and rural corridors, get the exact same number of waivers as a state with a fraction of that population?
It makes absolutely no sense. It is an arbitrary legislative cap that creates massive systemic friction. In states with high demand and large populations, those 30 slots are exhausted almost immediately.
I can imagine.
It creates this hyper-competitive environment where hospitals and clinics are essentially fighting each other for a desperately small pool of legally available talent.
Wow.
Think about it. If a clinic in a rural valley needs a pediatrician, but the state has already allocated its 30 waivers for the fiscal year, that clinic must wait an entire year to try again.
So the position remains vacant.
The position remains vacant. Patients go without care. The arbitrary cap transforms what should be a straightforward staffing procedure into a high-stakes, highly unpredictable lottery.
And even if you secure one of those 30 golden tickets, the bureaucratic gauntlet is far from over, is it? Securing the waiver from the state health department is just step one.
Step one.
Then you have to deal with the federal immigration agencies to actually facilitate the visa transition.
Exactly. The waiver simply gives you the permission to avoid the 2-year home requirement.
Right.
The hospital must then formally sponsor the physician for an H-1B visa, and this involves interacting with the Department of Labor to secure a labor condition application, proving prevailing wages, and then filing the complex H-1B petition with USCIS.
Which introduces so many points of failure.
Oh, everywhere. Each of these steps introduces the potential for administrative delays, requests for evidence, or premium processing hurdles. If USCIS is facing a backlog, a physician with a signed contract and a state-approved waiver might sit in legal limbo for months, unable to legally begin practicing.
This is where immigration policy directly dictates health policy.
100%.
An administrative delay at a service center in Vermont or Texas translates to canceled appointments and unstaffed emergency rooms in a community thousands of miles away. Attorney Chris Ingram provided a stark summary of this dynamic in the research.
Let's hear it.
Chris says, for a foreign-trained doctor, immigration planning is not just about personal career security. It can also affect whether patients in an underserved community have access to care. When a physician's visa is delayed or mishandled, the consequences can reach far beyond one person.
That is so true.
This emphasizes the absolute necessity of rigorous foresight. If I am a hospital administrator trying to staff a rural facility, I cannot treat the immigration process as some peripheral HR task. It has to be central to the operational strategy.
Exactly. For the listener application here, hospital administration must adopt a highly sophisticated approach to immigration compliance and timeline management. You cannot wait until a resident is in the final months of their program to initiate the Conrad 30 process.
Right, because the state-specific filing windows vary wildly, don't they?
They vary wildly. You must anticipate them. You must have the prevailing wage determinations prepared well in advance. And for the physician, the burden is equally heavy.
Because they're the ones whose lives are on the line.
Right. You are not just managing patient loads and studying for board certifications. You are project managing your own legal existence in the country. You must be intimately aware of the waiver availability in your target states, and you must rigorously vet your prospective employers to ensure they have the administrative competence to actually execute an H-1B sponsorship successfully.
Which brings us to a massive vulnerability in this entire system.
The employer tether.
Yes. Everything we just discussed regarding the transition from J-1 to H-1B and eventually to an employment-based green card through the per-im labor certification process hinges entirely on an employer. The hospital holds all the cards.
Or the tech company holds all the cards.
Right. You are tethered to the entity sponsoring your visa. If the hospital loses funding, if the tech startup pivots and lays off its engineering team, your legal status evaporates along with your paycheck.
Gone. In 60 days.
Yeah. For an innovator, a researcher whose grants are fluid, or a founder trying to build the next billion-dollar company without a traditional boss to sponsor them, this employer dependency is a massive deterrent.
It absolutely stifles innovation. The traditional employment-based immigration framework, specifically the labor certification process, which requires an employer to prove to the Department of Labor that there are no qualified U.S. workers available for your specific job. It's designed for static, predictable corporate roles.
Like a mid-level manager at a paper company.
Right. It is completely incompatible with the dynamic reality of modern STEM careers. A startup founder cannot logically test the labor market to replace themselves as the visionary of their own company.
We put an ad in the paper for a new Steve Jobs, but no one applied.
Exactly. Or think about a researcher working at the bleeding edge of quantum computing, whose funding shifts between private institutes and university labs. They cannot wait 2 years for an employer to clear the bureaucratic hurdles of perm.
And this is exactly why our legal team dedicated such a significant portion of their research to decoding the EB-2 national interest waiver, or the NIW.
Yes. This is the strategic pivot.
This is how you sever the tether to a specific employer and take control of your own immigration destiny. Let's dissect this, because the legal threshold here is incredibly high and the nuances really matter.
They do.
So the host introduces the employment-based second preference. Wait, scratch that. So the NIW allows an individual who qualifies for the employment-based second preference, meaning they hold an advanced degree or possess exceptional ability to bypass the labor certification process entirely.
That's the key.
Crucially, it allows them to self-petition. You do not need a job offer, and you do not need an employer sponsor.
It is the most powerful tool available to a highly skilled professional, but it is surrounded by this fog of misconception.
What kind of misconception?
Well, many assume that because it bypasses the employer requirement, it is somehow a loophole or, an easier path. In reality, you are exchanging the bureaucratic burden of the labor certification for an intensely rigorous evidentiary burden.
So it's not easier, it's just different.
It's much harder in some ways. You must convince the United States government that your specific professional endeavor is so valuable to the nation that they should waive their standard protective labor rules for your benefit.
USCIS is cracking down on visa fraud, and even approved cases are being revoked.
Why was my visa denied? USCIS revoked my approval. At the law offices of Chris M. Ingram, we handle every detail with care. Every form, every fact, every time.
So join us for a free consultation. We do things the right way. Let us take care of you.
Right, and our legal team provided the exact judicial framework that governs this evaluation, Matter of Dhanasar. This was a precedent decision that completely overhauled how USCIS evaluates these waivers, moving away from an older, far more restrictive standard.
Yeah, the old standard was a nightmare.
We need to break down the Dhanasar test, because this is the architecture of a successful self-petition. The test consists of 3 distinct prongs, and you must pass all 3. Let's start with prong 1. The government requires that your proposed endeavor has both substantial merit and national importance. I want to push on the distinction here because they sound synonymous, but legally they are very different.
They're entirely distinct concepts. Substantial merit evaluates the field of endeavor itself. Is the work intrinsically valuable?
Right.
Whether you are engaged in cancer research, civil engineering, cybersecurity, or optimizing supply chain logistics. Your work clearly possesses substantial merit. It has real-world utility. Almost any legitimate STEM profession easily clears the substantial merit hurdle. The true filter is national importance.
Okay, so how does an adjudicator define national importance? Let's use a specific hypothetical.
Okay.
Let's say I am a brilliant software architect. I design a proprietary, highly sophisticated internal accounting platform for a mid-sized regional bank. The software saves the bank $10 million a year, streamlines their operations, and secures their local data. That has substantial merit, clearly. But does it have national importance?
Under the Dhanasar framework, it almost certainly does not.
Really? Even saving $10 million?
The impact of that endeavor is highly localized. The primary beneficiary is a single, private, corporate entity. While it is valuable work, it does not possess the broad implications required to be deemed nationally important.
Okay, now let's change the scenario.
Yeah.
I'm that same software architect, but instead of an internal accounting tool for one bank, I develop a new cryptographic protocol that detects and neutralizes ransomware attacks targeting the broader U.S. financial grid.
Oh, completely different.
The software isn't just used by one bank, It is a foundational security architecture that multiple institutions can adopt to prevent catastrophic systemic failure.
That shifts the paradigm entirely. The endeavor now has broad national implications. It addresses a recognized vulnerability in critical U.S. infrastructure.
So the scale is what matters.
Yes. The impact extends far beyond your immediate employer or your specific geographic location. This is the crux of prong one. You must articulate your endeavor not just as a job description, but as a project that addresses a macro-level issue: climate change, national defense, public health, economic competitiveness, or systemic technological advancement.
Okay, so you clearly define the massive scope and importance of the work. That brings us to prong two of the Dhanasar test.
Yeah.
You must demonstrate that you are well-positioned to advance the proposed endeavor.
Right.
And this is where I see a massive catch-22 for a lot of younger professionals. Isn't this just a VIP pass for famous scientists? I mean, it feels like pitching a wildly ambitious startup to a venture capital firm.
How so?
I can walk into a VC office and say, developing artificial general intelligence is of national importance. Everyone will agree with me. But the VC is going to look at me and say, great idea, but why should we trust you to build it?
That is the exact analytical lens the USCIS officer is using. Prong one evaluates the idea. Prong two evaluates the individual. The government acknowledges the work is important, but they demand predictive evidence that you possess the specific capacity to actually execute it.
Right.
They will scrutinize your entire professional history. They look at your academic credentials, your record of past success in similar projects, your current progress on the endeavor, the funding or support you have secured, and your standing within the specialized community.
This speaks directly to a vital point our legal team extracted from attorney Chris Ingram. There is this pervasive myth that the NIW is an exclusive club for Nobel laureates or internationally famous CEOs.
It's just not true.
Chris explicitly clarifies this in the research. She states, no, the national interest waiver is not only for famous people. It is for qualified professionals who can show that their work has serious value, that the work matters to the United States, and that they are well positioned to keep advancing it. Many strong cases are built not on fame, but on careful evidence.
The emphasis on careful evidence cannot be overstated. When we evaluate whether someone is well-positioned, we are looking for an objective footprint of influence.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, if you are a researcher, we are not just looking at the sheer volume of papers you have published. A publication just proves you conducted an experiment and wrote about it. We are looking at your citation record.
Right, because citations act as an independent metric of influence. It's the difference between speaking into a void and having an audience actively taking notes.
Exactly. A citation demonstrates that independent experts in your field found your methodology or your findings so critical that they relied upon them to advance their own work. It proves your research is actively shaping the direction of the field.
That makes total sense.
Right. If your work on renewable battery materials is being cited by engineers at major automotive companies who are designing the next generation of electric vehicles, that is powerful, objective evidence that you are well-positioned to advance the endeavor. But wait, what if the listener isn't in academia? What if they are an entrepreneur or an industry engineer who doesn't publish papers in peer-reviewed journals? How do they establish that footprint of influence?
The evidentiary standard adapts to the nature of the industry. For a startup founder, the evidence of being well-positioned might be the successful acquisition of venture capital funding. VCs conduct intense due diligence. Securing their investment is an objective validator of your capacity.
Oh, that's clever.
It could be securing government grants, achieving significant user growth, or demonstrating clear commercial traction for a prototype. For an industry engineer, the evidence heavily relies on independent expert letters.
Let's talk about those letters because I know they are a crucial component of the petition. The instinct is to go to your current manager or your former university professor to write a glowing recommendation.
Which is a mistake.
Right. My understanding is that these letters need to carry far more weight than a standard performance review. A letter from your direct supervisor confirming that you are a diligent employee and a talented coder is practically useless in a national interest waiver petition. USCIS expects your boss to say good things about you.
Because they're biased.
Exactly. The evidentiary value is extremely low due to the inherent bias. The letters that actually carry weight, the ones that definitively prove you are well-positioned, come from independent, high-level experts in the field who may have never worked with you directly, but who know of your work because of its impact.
So you need a senior engineer at a competing firm or recognized industry analyst to state on the record, I have reviewed this individual's architectural designs and they represent a paradigm shift in how we approach this specific problem. Our entire sector is adopting this standard.
Exactly. The letter must provide granular technical detail about why your specific contribution is unique and irreplaceable, and it must connect that contribution to the broader national interest. Which brings us to the final hurdle. Prong 3 of the Dhanasar test.
Prong 3.
You must prove that, on balance, it would be beneficial to the United States to waive the requirements of a job offer and labor certification.
The balancing test. The government is essentially asking, even if the work is important and even if you are great at it, why should we let you skip the line and avoid the standard employer-sponsored process that protects American workers?
And your argument here must be rooted in urgency and practicality. You argue that the traditional labor certification process, which can take well over a year and tether you to a single static job description, would actively hinder your ability to pursue the nationally important endeavor.
So you turn the bureaucracy against itself.
Yes. For the founder, the argument is straightforward. You cannot test the labor market to fill your own role as the creator of the enterprise. For the researcher, you might argue that your expertise is so specialized, and the need for your advancements in, say, virology or artificial intelligence is so urgent that subjecting you to a lengthy bureaucratic delay would be detrimental to U.S. interests.
You are arguing that the value you bring significantly outweighs the protective interests of the labor certification process.
Exactly. It is a phenomenal framework, but as you said earlier, it demands rigorous, continuous documentation. You cannot build a Dhanasar case in a weekend. You have to be thinking about your citations, your industry influence, and your independent validators years in advance.
Years in advance, yeah. Well, this deep dive into the legal mechanics of the NIW perfectly sets the stage for the final phase of our discussion.
A macro view.
Exactly. We have looked at the individual micro-narratives. The visionary tech CEO, the doctor navigating the Conrad 30 bottleneck, the researcher methodically building a self-petition. Now, I want to zoom out. I want to look at the sheer scale of what this means for the United States as a whole.
Yeah, let's look at the data.
Our legal team provided a set of statistics from a recent National Science Board report that completely recontextualizes the scale of this issue.
The aggregate numbers are where the true strategic vulnerability of the United States becomes undeniable.
Okay, let's lay out the data. As of 2023, the total STEM workforce in the United States stood at roughly 36 million individuals.
36 million, that's a massive segment of the economy.
It is, but the critical data point is this. Of those 36 million workers, 8 million were foreign-born.
Wow.
That is 22%. More than 1 in 5 people actively working in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in this country navigated the immigration system to be here.
See, they are not a supplementary workforce. They are not a margin of error. They are a foundational pillar of the American technological and scientific enterprise.
Right.
If you were to instantly remove 22% of the engineers maintaining the power grid, the researchers developing pharmaceuticals, and the data scientists optimizing supply chains, you do not just experience a minor dip in productivity, you experience a systemic economic contraction. The U.S. economy is structurally dependent on this continuous influx of highly specialized talent.
And the demand for that talent is only accelerating. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that STEM occupations will grow by 8.1% over the next decade.
8.1%.
That is astronomically higher than the projected 2.7% growth for non-STEM occupations. We are transitioning entirely into an advanced knowledge-based economy. These are high-leverage roles. The median wage for these positions is over $103,000, meaning they are significant drivers of tax revenue, consumer spending, and secondary job creation.
Absolutely.
But the most staggering statistic our researchers pulled, the one that really forces you to reevaluate the narrative concerns, business formation, and the apex of the tech sector.
You're talking about the data regarding unicorn startups.
Yes. A study analyzing the most successful startup companies in the United States, those privately held companies valued at $1 billion or more, the so-called unicorns, revealed that immigrants started 55% of them.
Over half.
Let me repeat that because it defies conventional assumptions. 319 out of $582 billion startups in America were founded by individuals who were born in another country.
It is a staggering concentration of high-impact entrepreneurship, and it illustrates a profound point about risk tolerance and innovation.
Oh, that's an interesting connection.
Yeah, think about the psychological profile of someone willing to uproot their life, navigate a labyrinthine legal system, and establish themselves in a new country. It is highly correlated with the psychological profile of an entrepreneur willing to disrupt an established industry.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Right. They possess a high tolerance for ambiguity, a relentless drive, and a unique perspective that allows them to identify massive inefficiencies in the market. The U.S. has historically been the primary beneficiary of this specific type of human capital.
Historically being the operative word there, because this leads to the stark warning from the national academies that our legal team highlighted. We look at that 55% number, we look at the 8 million foreign-born STEM workers, and it is easy to become complacent.
Very easy.
It is easy to assume that the brightest minds in the world will always inherently default to the United States. But we are no longer operating in a unipolar talent market. The global competition for this exact demographic, the machine learning experts, the biomedical engineers, the hardware architects, has become fiercely intense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the rest of the world has looked at the economic output generated by U.S. immigration, and they have decided to actively replicate it while exploiting our systemic weaknesses.
Exploiting our weaknesses.
Yeah. Other developed nations are looking at the severe friction in the U.S. system, the H-1B lotteries, where brilliant graduates face a 20% chance of selection, the arbitrary Conrad 30 caps, the PRM labor certification process that can drag on for 2 years, and those decades-long green card backlogs for nationals of certain high-skill countries.
The mess.
They see the anxiety and the wasted potential, and they are actively weaponizing their own immigration policies to siphon off that talent.
We see this playing out aggressively in real time.
Yeah.
Canada, for example, has recognized this exact vulnerability. They have implemented programs specifically targeting highly skilled workers who are frustrated by the U.S. system, offering streamlined, predictable pathways to permanent residency in a matter of months, not years.
Canada's very smart about this.
And the UK has implemented high-potential individual visas that target graduates from top global universities, completely bypassing the need for an employer sponsor. They are essentially rolling out the red carpet for the exact same talent pool the U.S. subjects to endless administrative delays.
It is a calculated strategy of talent acquisition. If a brilliant AI researcher from an elite university realizes they might spend the next 15 years of their life in the U.S. tethered to a specific employer, constantly worried about losing their H-1B status, they are increasingly likely to look north to Toronto or across the Atlantic to London.
Capital is globally mobile, and the talent that creates capital is increasingly globally mobile. If the U.S. system remains sluggish, opaque, and overly restrictive, the next generation of billion-dollar startups will simply be incorporated elsewhere.
Exactly.
This brings us back to the immediate reality for the listener. You are operating in a system that is incredibly complex, historically backlogged, and highly competitive. So how do you, as an individual navigating this machinery, prove your individual worth in a sea of 8 million foreign-born STEM workers?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do you prevent yourself from becoming just another rejected petition in the lottery? Attorney Chris Ingram provided a brilliant synthesis of the ultimate strategy in our research.
What's the strategy?
Chris states, a strong immigration case should not only say what you do, it should show why your work matters. If your research, engineering, medical service, technology, or business activity benefits the United States, then your evidence should make that value clear.
That quote encapsulates the fundamental shift in perspective required for a successful petition. It is the transition from a technical description to an impact narrative. As we discussed earlier, the USCIS adjudicator reviewing your file is an expert in immigration law, but they are almost certainly not an expert in your specific scientific discipline.
No, they're not a robotics engineer.
Right. If you submit a petition that reads like a deeply technical white paper on the mathematical optimization of a neural network, the adjudicator will not understand the value of your work. You must translate the technical achievement into tangible, quantifiable human or economic impact.
You have to bridge the gap between the micro-level technical execution and the macro-level societal benefit. You cannot just say, I reduced the latency of this data pipeline by 20 milliseconds. You have to ask the so what question, and you have to keep asking it until you hit a national interest.
Exactly. I reduced latency by 20 milliseconds. So what? That optimization allows high-frequency trading platforms to execute trades more reliably.
So what?
That increased reliability stabilizes liquidity in volatile financial markets.
So what?
That stability protects the integrity of the broader U.S. financial system and safeguards institutional investments. C. You have taken a highly technical, seemingly esoteric engineering task and connected it directly to the national economic interests.
It's brilliant. Did your work save an industry millions of dollars? Did it enhance the structural safety of public infrastructure? Did it create a new market that generated domestic jobs? The burden is entirely on you to connect those dots. You cannot assume the adjudicator will extrapolate the value of your work. You must map it out for them with clear, undeniable evidence.
It is about making the invisible work visible. So much of the crucial STEM work in this country happens quietly. The structural engineer who designs a more resilient bridge doesn't get a front-page article when the bridge stands strong during a storm.
Right.
The cybersecurity analyst who successfully patches a zero-day vulnerability in a hospital's database doesn't get a parade. The hospital simply continues to function, and patient data remains secure. But in the realm of immigration law, that quiet success must be aggressively documented and forcefully presented.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, unpacking the intricate, high-stakes intersection of career strategy and immigration law. We started with the foundational lesson of Jensen Huang, exploring how technical depth compounds over time and why documenting that early growth is legally critical.
Yeah, the Denny's lesson.
We shifted to the front lines of healthcare, exposing the systemic friction of the J-1 visa and the arbitrary limitations of the Conrad 30 waiver, and how those administrative hurdles directly threaten patient care in underserved communities.
Real lives on the line.
We took a deep, rigorous dive into the Matter of Dhanasar framework, dissecting the exact evidentiary standards required to bypass employer dependency through the national interest waiver. And finally, we pulled back to the macro view, analyzing the 36 million person STEM workforce, the undeniable entrepreneurial impact of immigrants, and the escalating global competition for this vital human capital.
When you synthesize all of these distinct narratives, the founder, the physician, the researcher, the overarching conclusion is absolute. Technological superiority, medical advancement, and economic dominance are not guaranteed by birth rate or geography. They are actively engineered by attracting, retaining, and empowering the most capable minds on the planet.
Which leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you, the listener, to mull over as we wrap up. It builds directly on the incredible data our legal team brought forward today. We established that 55% of today's billion-dollar startups were founded by immigrants. That is a concrete reality of our current economic landscape.
Yes, it is.
But I want you to think about the invisible pipeline of future talent. Think about the fierce global competition we just discussed. If nations like Canada and the UK continue to aggressively streamline their immigration frameworks, offering red carpet treatment to the brightest engineers and founders, while our system remains bogged down in arbitrary caps, backlogs, and pervasive anxiety, what happens to the next generation of innovation?
That's the real risk.
Are we right now turning away the next Jensen Huang before they even get a chance to sit down in that Denny's booth and sketch out a business plan? Are we frustrating the researcher who holds the key to the next breakthrough in clean energy, or the physician who will transform rural healthcare delivery simply because a labor certification took too long to process or an H-1B lottery failed them?
It's tragic to think about.
It is something to deeply consider the next time you hear a broad political debate about maintaining technological superiority or economic leadership. Because true technological superiority is not about the hardware you currently possess. It is, at its absolute core, a human talent strategy.
It is the defining strategic challenge of the next economic era.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply encouraging thought from attorney Chris Ingram, drawn directly from our legal team's research. Regardless of where you are in this complex journey, whether you are an exhausted medical resident pulling a night shift, a researcher anxiously awaiting grant funding, or an engineer trying to compile your very first evidence folder, Chris offers this perspective. Do not underestimate the value of your journey. Many immigrants begin quietly, working hard, studying late, serving others, and building skills before anyone recognizes their contribution. If your work is honest, serious, and beneficial, keep building your record and keep moving forward with courage.
Keep moving forward with courage, and back that courage up with relentless documentation and strategic foresight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you gained a lot from this discussion. Please leave us a comment if you can. Additionally, you can support our channel by sharing it with your friends and family, helping us build this community together. Also follow us on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Instagram, where we're growing rapidly thanks to our social media team. We'd also like to thank attorney Chris Ingram and his dedicated team once again for researching and preparing this material for our presentation. See you next time on Let's Talk U.S. Immigration. Bye for now.